Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
The jump in NASDAQ futures follows better than expected earnings from both Amazon and Facebook parent Meta platforms. Let's get the details from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
Nathan, holiday spending online led to strong growth in sales and profit for Amazon, and a craze around artificial intelligence driving healthy sales in its cloud computing arm. Its profit last quarter surged to $10.6 billion. That's the strongest in 2 years, and it got there in part by cutting about 35,000 jobs. Facebook parent Meta reported fourth quarter results that beat expectations. They gave an outlook that's seen as strong. They also partly got there as a result of cost cutting. Meta cut headcount by 22% last year, and they also had money to spare. Meta unveiling plans for a $50 billion stock buyback and even announcing its first ever quarterly dividend. The two stocks have combined to surge by more than $270 billion in pre-market trading. Right now, Meta up more than 18%. Amazon is up about 9%. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Well, Meta investors are not the only ones reaping the benefits of the company's first ever dividend. Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg stands to receive a payout of about $700 million a year. According to data compiled by Bloomberg, Zuckerberg holds about 350 million shares, and that means he would take home about $175 million in each quarterly payment before taxes.
Well, Karen, it's a different earnings story at Apple. Those shares are down about 1%. The company's latest quarterly results are triggering investor fears that Apple's losing clout in China, which generates roughly a fifth of its sales. Bloomberg's Emily Chang spoke with one of Apple's top executives after that earnings report.
I did just speak with Apple CFO Luca Maestri. He said, we're not happy with it, but we know that China is the most competitive market in the world, and we do still see a lot of long-term opportunity there. He did call out that the iPhone declined less than the other product categories. That is, the iPhone did better than the other product categories in China. He said that they saw a record install base. They're still seeing strong growth in upgraders. But again, this is a market that folks have been very concerned about.
And Bloomberg's Emily Chang says revenue from China plunged 13% last quarter. That marked the worst decline since the 2018 holiday season.
Well, Nathan, the world's leading AI chipmaker is looking to grow overseas. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang says countries like India, Japan, France, and Canada are talking more about building what he calls sovereign AI capabilities. He says that focus on homegrown AI infrastructure will drive demand for NVIDIA's products.
It's become abundantly clear to each one of the countries that their natural resource, which is the data of their country, should be refined and produce intelligence of their country for their country.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang tells Bloomberg it's in America's interest for companies to win in overseas markets.
Well, a big tech's grabbing the spotlight this morning, Karen. It is also a big day on the economic front. We get the highly anticipated jobs report for the month of January, and the median forecast is for a gain of 185,000 jobs. We get a preview now from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The Fed is no longer expecting a big jump in unemployment and wants to see a strong labor market, Chairman Jay Powell said this week. Economists think they will get it. The forecast is for another month of large job gains, and while there is a slight tick up in unemployment seen, January should be the 24th consecutive month with a jobless rate under 4%. What the numbers won't do is bring any action from the central bank. Although Powell suggests rate cuts are coming, he all but ruled out the next meeting in March. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. And speaking of Jay Powell, we'll hear more from the Fed chairman this weekend. He will appear on 60 Minutes on CBS this Sunday. The network says Powell will discuss inflation risks, expected rate cuts, and the banking system.
Now, Karen, monetary policy is also in focus in Europe. Despite leaving rates unchanged yesterday, the Bank of England did open the door to interest rate cuts this year. But BOE Governor Andrew Bailey tells Bloomberg factors like Middle East turmoil and rising living standards could be inflationary.
We have included a risk, by the way, a new risk actually, which is really reflecting obviously sort of tragic events in the Middle East and the impact that can have through the Red Sea effects. So I think now the question is for us is for how long do we need to maintain this stance going forwards? As I've said a number of times, we're not making predictions at this point.
BOE Governor Andrew Bailey's comments come as the Monetary Policy Committee in the UK saw its first member vote to cut rates since the pandemic.
Well, turning back to the markets, Nathan, we continue to follow shares of New York Community Bank Corp. They've tumbled for 2 straight days as Wall Street downgrades piled up, and Moody's put the lender on review for a credit rating cut. The stock is trading at its lowest level since 2000. It sank 11% yesterday, adding to Wednesday's record 38% plunge.
And shares of Clorox are up more than 7% in early trading, Karen. The company, which makes Pine Sol surface cleaners and Glad trash bags, is raising its sales and profit forecast for the year. Clorox has restocked its inventory rapidly following a cyber hack that paralyzed its manufacturing operations last year.
And Nathan, Visa said it blocked a record amount of suspected fraud last year. The San Francisco-based payments giant says it blocked $40 billion worth, and that's nearly double the $23 billion seen in the year before. Visa says blocked transactions in the U.S. were up more than 450% year on year in December. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Senate negotiators are closing in on a deal now that would address the southern border and send aid to Israel and Ukraine. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons with the latest.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer sounded optimistic during his speech on the Senate floor.
Conversations are ongoing. Some issues still need resolution, but we are getting very close on the National Security Supplemental.
Schumer says the text of the proposal will be ready no later than Sunday, with the vote planned for midweek. It's expected to provide money for more border agents, as well as grant the president new powers to expedite the deportation of undocumented migrants and also tighten criteria for applying for asylum. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, the acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement has revealed a big operation resulting in 171 arrests in more than 24 cities. ICE acting director Patrick Lechleitner praised the agency's officers, who he said work hard despite having few resources.
We're working with the department and administration and our partners, obviously, in Congress from appropriations. Listen, we need more resources, and we're working to get that as hard as we can.
Lechleitner warned his team may have to make some tough decisions if Congress does not provide more funding by March. President Biden, meanwhile, falling out of favor with minority voters. A new poll done in Texas shows Donald Trump holds a 6-point lead among Hispanics. Mark Jones ran the poll for the University of Houston.
While Biden handily defeated Trump among Latinos back in 2020, now they're effectively tied, with Trump having a slight advantage.
Jones says the president is losing Latino support along the border, where the state's push to stop illegal immigration is popular. Voters in South Carolina are set to cast the first ballots in the Democratic primary tomorrow. The Palmetto State was essential in helping Biden's 2020 campaign turn around. Valley Brook Outreach Baptist Church pastor Curtis Johnson is concerned about the lack of enthusiasm among black voters this time around.
I am concerned about lack of enthusiasm. I am concerned that so many of our community, and I understand, feeling that some of the issues that are more relevant to us are not being addressed.
More than 22% of South Carolinians planning to vote in the Democratic primary tomorrow said they were undecided on which candidate would receive their vote. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thanks. We do bring you news throughout the day right here on Bloomberg Radio, but now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Just subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with Dan Schwartzman. Dan.
Good morning, Karen. Round 2 of the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am coming up later this morning. Thomas Detry atop the leaderboard after the first round at 9 under. In second, American Patrick Cantlay in third place. Matthew Pavon at 7 under. Meanwhile, big trade in Major League Baseball. The Baltimore Orioles acquiring former Cy Young Award winner Corbin Burns from the Milwaukee Brewers. In return, the Orioles shipping to Milwaukee Joey Ortiz, an infielder, left-hander DL Hall, as well as the 34th pick in the 2024 draft. Burns coming off a season of going 10-8 with a 3.39 ERA and 200 strikeouts in a little over 193 innings. Burns will be a free agent after next year. NBA scoreboard, big win by the Lakers as they win on the road in Boston. Here's a drive by Reeves. Flips it behind the back in the corner to Prince. Drives the baseline, skips it. Hachimura. Up top it goes. Russell, who drains a three. That's courtesy of ESPN. Boston losing at home to the Lakers 114-105. The Knicks continue to be red hot. They've now won 9 straight. A come-from-behind 109-105 home win over the Indiana Pacers. Jalen Brunson, 40 points in the win for New York. Cavaliers, a one-way 101 win over the Grizzlies in Memphis, while the 76ers slipped past the Utah Jazz 127-124. Speaking of the Sixers, big news as reigning league MVP Joel Embiid will be missing some time after he suffered a lateral meniscus injury in his left knee when forward Jonathan Kuminga of the Golden State Warriors fell on his leg on Tuesday. Embiid's going to be out the rest of the weekend. Treatment options are being thought out. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Dan Schwartzman.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Big tech remains a big focus for investors. We got earnings after the bell yesterday from Apple, Amazon, and Meta platforms. For Amazon and Meta, cost-cutting and re-strategizing seem to be paying off, and even Apple has gotten a return to growth, but that's getting overshadowed just a bit by a slowdown in China. Let's get more on these tech earnings now. We're joined by Bloomberg's Alex Webb. And Alex, let's start off with Meta because that stock is really getting attention this morning, a big surge in the shares. Is this just all about the fact that investors are going to get a dividend for the first time?
I'm sure that is a big factor. It's kind of interesting. It's almost like the final pillar in a pivot. Well, I don't know if it's final, maybe they'll be doing more, but it's another pillar in this pivot away from being perceived just as an outright growth stock, right? Obviously we've seen in over the past year or so that growth stocks aren't being rewarded in quite the same way. People are looking for something a little bit different, and we've seen Meta really focus on efficiency. It had its so-called year of efficiency last year. It cut a lot of jobs. The comments from Mark Zuckerberg yesterday were that he's not looking to do any meaningful hiring this year. Doesn't mean they're not spending money. They are spending quite a lot on things like the metaverse and AI, but that doesn't necessarily mean more headcount. Ultimately, the actual core advertising business didn't do brilliantly, but the overall earnings, it was a significant beat on the top line, and this cherry on the cake in the form of the dividend.
We did get a pretty strong forecast, though, didn't we, when it comes to the ad market, that core business for Meta platforms? Does that say something about whether they can pull off this pivot that, at least as far as the metaverse is gone for Meta, hasn't really been rewarded so far for Mark Zuckerberg?
No, although the Reality Labs business, which is what they're doing, that's where their virtual reality headsets come from, did post its first quarter where it had more than $1 billion in revenue. Ultimately, the question has been, is the ads market resilient enough to be able to sustain the cash expense on all these new technologies? And the message seems to be yes, it is. A lot of the business appears to be coming from particularly Chinese direct-to-consumer websites, names like Shein, for instance, that have actually been, in some ways, been taking chunks out of Amazon. But of course, to find their customers, they're using many of Meta's platforms, in particular Instagram.
Let's talk about Amazon. Had a blowout holiday quarter. What's the big takeaway from those results for you?
Again, it's a similar story to Meta, that they have been focusing on costs to a far greater extent than we've seen previously. They've cut a fair number of jobs, but in things like Prime Video and Twitch, which is its game streaming service to watch games being live streamed. The numbers, about 35,000 jobs they've cut, obviously significant impact on the poor people who've lost their jobs, but in the grand scheme of things, Amazon employs 1.5 million people in full-time, part-time roles. So, the numbers themselves pretty much met expectations. There was, this online sales pretty much in line with expectations. Same with Amazon Web Services. the good thing for investors when you look at AWS is that there had been a little bit of concern that maybe it wasn't as strong in AI as Microsoft and Google, who have really been making good headway there. Doesn't seem to have had too detrimental an effect on the growth in AWS. So, that is a little, certainly a bright spot for investors.
Not so bright, though, for Apple investors, getting a bit of a dip, even after returning to growth for the first time in, I think, 4 quarters.
Yeah, it beat estimates on the revenue line. Much of that seemed to be to do with Europe, where it did far better than the street had been expecting. But China is a big disappointment. People knew that it was going to be bad. There's a certain upswell in patriotism there, particularly when it comes to buying mobile phones. We saw this, or smartphones. We saw this 6 or 7 years ago, where Apple took a bit of a hit in China as local brands such as Oppo, Vivo at the time, Xiaomi and Huawei took share out of Apple. It looks like that is happening again. Analysts had been expecting about $23.5 billion in sales in China. In the end, it was less than $21 billion. And the commentary looking forward doesn't seem all that bullish for that market either.
Just 30 seconds left, Alex, but could we see Apple get more love later on today when the Vision Pro finally hits stores?
I think the thing about the Vision Pro is it's really a statement piece that says Apple, we are still leading technologically, right? It's not going to make any meaningful difference to their earnings in the near term, maybe in the medium term. And the other piece to that, of course, is that Apple doesn't need it to be a success per se. It just needs it to do better than whatever Meta comes out with, right? If Meta were to somehow own this space of virtual reality, augmented reality, that would be a big problem for Apple. But if none of them are successful, then ultimately it's not the end of the world for Tim Cook.
Bringing it right around to the competition, the fierce competition around wearables and AI in this big tech space. Thank you for this, as always. Alex Webb of Bloomberg News.
Well, Nathan, you did mention AI, and a lot of the excitement around these mega cap names has been driven by the promise of artificial intelligence. And there's no bigger chip maker in that space than NVIDIA. Now, the semiconductor maker's CEO, Jensen Huang, says demand for his company's products will be driven not just by its current customers in the Magnificent Seven. He's pointing to companies and governments overseas aiming to build and run their own homegrown AI infrastructure. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang discussed it with Bloomberg technology co-host Ed Ludlow, and let's listen into part of that conversation now.
You have seen India, Japan, France, Canada now, Southeast Asia, Singapore, speak up about the importance of investing in sovereign AI capabilities. It is become abundantly clear to each one of the countries that their natural resource, which is the data of their country, should be refined and produce intelligence of their country for their country. And that capability of refining the data of their country and turn it into their artificial intelligence is now possible in a quite a democratized way. Almost every country should be able to do it for themselves. And what's needed, of course, is the technology and the know-how of standing up AI infrastructure, and that's where we could be quite helpful to various regions. And so I think that the recognition of the importance of sovereign AI capabilities is now quite global.
Jensen, does that recognition and your ability to help extend to China?
Well, we're an American company, and we have to comply with American policies. And whatever the rules and regulations are and the laws are, we'll, number one, comply with that. Work closely with the regulators and understand their intentions and their desires, work within those boundaries, and be able to create products for the various countries that are involved, fully in compliant with the regulations that are in front of us. And beyond that, once we comply, our goal and the United States would love to see us be a successful country. And one of the pillars of national security is successful industries, and it creates jobs and allows our country to stay ahead and technologically. And so, it is of great interest of our nation that our American companies are successful around the world. And so once we comply with the regulations, we'll do our best to serve the local markets. And we have excellent communications with the administration.
How should we think about sovereign AI as a business line for you? Is there a way that we can understand how NVIDIA's work, even if it's building supercomputers like in the UK, for example, what proportion of your overall business that will represent?
The vast majority of the computing market has been United States and to a much smaller degree, China. For the very first time, every industry would be every single country will become a computer industry, and every industry will become a technology industry. And so artificial intelligence, or the automation, the production at scale of intelligence, matters to every single country and matters to every single industry. And so for the very first time, there's a whole new computer market that is going to be in every single country and every single market. And it starts with, of course, the native computer industry itself. But you're seeing a great adoption in healthcare, great adoption in logistics, in transportation, of course, in manufacturing, in the large industries, the heavy industries. For the very first time, because of generative AI, computer technology is going to impact literally every single industry in every single country.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.